Hello, and thank you for joining me as I come to the end of my first week in self-isolation. You're probably aware that last Thursday night a great cheer went up around our neighbourhoods as people up and down the country stood out on their doorsteps to show their appreciation to the NHS. Indeed, some have taken it even a step further, like this farmer in Devon, for example. The NHS are indeed doing a phenomenal job in very difficult circumstances. They are on the front line of dealing with the present coronavirus crisis, and we should be extremely thankful for their valiant efforts on our behalf. But I wanted to just think for a moment today about the underlying worldview of those around us. We live in an increasingly godless culture, where anything beyond ourselves and our own might is pretty much ruled out. So people look at the current crisis and they say, well, here is the problem, and now it's down to us to solve it. This has been the flavour of a number of posts that you might have seen on social media, perhaps like this one here. How times have changed. During the Second World War, it was still seen as perfectly obvious that we should all pray when a great disaster hit the country. But our government actually hasn't called for a national day of prayer since the 1940s. As God's people, we have, and certainly ought to have, a very different worldview to that. Our first response when faced with a crisis ought to be to get on our knees before the King of Kings. And indeed, over the last few days, a number of calls to prayer have come from within various church denominations, and only rightly so. This is the only sane action to take when you understand that God is absolutely sovereign over everything. In church, we recently started a series in the Bible book of Job. And in the opening chapters, as the plot of the book is laid out, you get a powerful reminder of just who it is that runs the universe. In the first chapter, Satan comes to God and he tells God that Job only worships him because God is good to Job and he gives him so many worldly blessings. Well, God replies in verse 12 of chapter 1 saying, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands. But on the man himself, do not lay a finger." And it is so. Satan can take Job's wealth, and I'm sure he delights to do so. And he takes all of his possessions, even his children. But he cannot do more than that. And so Job wins God's wager. Despite all of his losses, at the end of that first chapter, we read that he blesses the name of God. Well, in the second chapter, Satan returns to God's throne room, having been proved wrong, but he wants another crack at Job, double or nothing, if you like. He now claims that if Job's health was taken from him, then he would certainly curse God. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." And so again, we see that God, in absolute sovereignty, sets the boundaries for all that evil may do. Satan may only go so far and no further. Well, we should take at least two things from this. The first is that God really is in charge. And if he is really in charge, then praying to him in these days of national anxiety should be a top priority for his people. The second thing is that we should remember that in everything that happens, God has his good purposes. They're all plans that must conform to his sovereign will, even though we might be left scratching our heads. So in the coming days, as I hope you are already, do make sure that you set time aside to pray. Pray for our world. And bless the name of the Lord for his constant goodness, provision, and care.